This is the Ethanol Report, the industry podcast from the Renewable Fuels Association since 2008. I'm Cindy Zimmerman.
One of the most interesting panels at the recent 30th National Ethanol Conference was Back to the Beginning, Celebrating Our Roots, where we heard from some of the pioneers who founded the modern-day ethanol industry. From the founder of the design-build firm ICM to board members of 4 of the nation's oldest ethanol plants, they told the tales of triumph over adversity in the early years. One recurring theme was the corn farmers who really formed the roots of the ethanol industry. Karol King, who's chairman of the board with Southwest Iowa Renewable Energy, or SIRE, goes all the way back to the earliest days of the 1970s and gasohol.
Well, I was in the Iowa corn growers for several years, and we tried to get the checkoff passed, and it was a referendum vote by the producers. It took 3 tries, but we finally got it done. We got it done by a message that we're going to promote ethanol fuels. And it wasn't ethanol then, it was alcohol.
Yep.
Gasohol. So that's how we got it passed. And the first, they went through promotions in state and stuff. But I read in the local paper about a meeting in Lincoln about a group that's going to talk about some kind of a national organization to talk about gasohol, alcohol fuels. So I drove over to Lincoln and sat with a small group of people there, talked about possibility of forming a national organization for promotion. And that was the National Gasohol Commission that we formed. I went back 3 times more, and we finally got the bylaws passed what we were going to do, and selected the officers and got the thing started. And that was actually one of our bigger first meetings we had was in Lincoln, and then we went to Chicago in 2018. We had a big meeting in Chicago. On the board of the directors of the National Gasohol Commission, there was representing 26 states. And that's, to me, that's amazing, the interest at that time across the country in alcohol fuels. And we had a meeting in North Carolina that Gordon Cooper, the astronaut, was there promoting the stuff. So it was not just a local Midwest thing. I mean, that's primarily where a lot of the people are from. But the officers of the National Gasohol Commission covered a lot of different states. And the Holly Hodge with the wheat growers was the president. Al Mavis from Illinois Ag was a VP. Ray Anderson from the Minnesota Farmers Union was a VP. Kansas State Senator Dean Sheeler was a VP. Ken Morgan from North Dakota was a treasurer. He was a state senator, and Wyoming Representative Doug Chamberlain was a secretary, and another VP was Montana State Senator Harold Dover. So it's just a really broad base of people that got interested in alcohol fuels. And the purpose of the National Gasohol Commission was to bring national attention to alcohol fuels and the possibilities for doing something with that. And it was a short-lived group, I think probably 3-4 years, something like that, but it served its purpose.
Right.
And it was in 1980 when they passed the, can't remember what they called that act, but it was a Energy Act of 1980, and that was kind of a result of some of the work we had done with the Carter administration and their group. They're trying to get some national momentum.
Rod Jorgenson serves on the board of Minnesota's Alcorn Clean Fuel, which was founded in 1994 thanks to what became known as the Minnesota Model.
The Minnesota Model was a private public partnership that really its goal was to add value back to the farm and to offer some economic stimulus for some economic development in rural Minnesota. So what was interesting about that program that the legislature came about is many of you might be familiar with the Minnesota Producer Program. And so what the legislature in Minnesota did is they basically said to you rural areas, you farmers, you guys get together, form a co-op, which was how most of us formed, organize, figure out a way to build a plant, get your funding, and get that plant operating. And once you're operating, then we'll partner with you and provide funding. And what that funding was 20 cents per gallon for the first 15 million gallons a year for 10 years. That was the policy side of it. The funding side was another situation. But for plants at that time, securing funding was probably one of the biggest hurdles. And there frankly wasn't many options out there. And I think that piece, knowing that here's a state that's gone out and committed to this program and to this industry, it gave lenders the confidence that, one, there's going to be some money behind that, so that will help us. But it gave them the confidence that we can stick our neck out and lend to us. And so that was an interesting coalition, too, because then shortly after, backing up, I had the chance to visit with someone that was a part of that program early on. The goal was, in the legislators' minds, if we could get 10 plants to produce 10 million gallons, we'd produce 100 million gallons a year in the state. And that was the goal. And I think last year we produced 1.4 billion gallons in the state. So, it was a wildly successful program. I think the state appropriated a little over $300 million in the course of it, but, we all know what the economic impact has been for the state. So, that was how that came about. And then shortly after, we started producing all this ethanol. And so, the next step was, we need to have a requirement that Minnesota burns 10% ethanol. And it was an interesting coalition because obviously you had Minnesota Corn Growers, Farmers Union, Farm Bureau, the typical, allies, but we also had urban legislators, right, from the liberal side of the aisle that were dealing with smog. And they wanted to clean up the air in Minneapolis. And so we had them. We had conservatives in the rural areas. The coalition, Minnesota has an iron range where, it has a steel taconite industry. They were on board because they knew, like we did, what the struggles were of a down industry. And that's where farming had come off of. So it was really a coalition that brought that together, and it really jump-started a lot of plants. It was kind of interesting. Early on, our organization was called the Minnesota Coalition for Ethanol, and we'd meet early on in St. Paul and go over and lobby. And, someone that no one ever knew would walk in the door and, oh, who are you? Well, we're a group of guys trying to get a plant going in this part of town. And so we'd go in around and introduce each other, and it was a pretty exciting time.
Dakota Ethanol started in 1999, and Chairman Todd Brown says it was the corn growers who developed a plan to grow the industry in South Dakota.
The ethanol industry was just becoming new. There was a few private plants, but when I look back, the South Dakota corn growers were so all in and so dedicated, and when you think about it, we were going to be the first plant, and we were going to be a 40 million gallon brewing plant, and so it was going to take $15 to $20 million worth of equity, and that hadn't been done. It definitely hadn't been in South Dakota. And so the South Dakota corn growers were very instrumental, and they did a lot of things that really tipped the scale that we were able to get the $15 to $20 million that we needed of equity or whatever. And when I say that, there was 12 farmers that volunteered to be on this board, and we had some things we had to pay for, and Pro Exporter, I think, was the company that did a corn study. I mean, we were all farmers. We knew there was plenty of it out there, but you got to be able to sell this to bankers and other things, and so you had to do some things. So the corn growers stepped in and did that or whatever and funded that. But they started a process, a corn fund and corn investment fund, around $1 million. And what they were going to do with that was they were going to invest it as equity in this company. And then once the plant got up and running, they were going to ask for it back, and they were going to take it to the next plant and the next plant and just keep doing that. And it turned out to be very successful, and they did it in multiple plants in the state of South Dakota. And so they were very instrumental that way. And then they did one other thing that really tipped the scale. We ended up with 943 individual investors, most of them farmers, because you did have a corn delivery agreement with it. But they allowed the farmer to have access to their checkoff dollars up to like $500. And so a lot of these guys, the minimum investment was $10,000. If they got that $500 for $9,500, they could be an investor in here, and it kind of tipped them over the edge. And it's probably why we got to 940 investors, of which it took all of them. It was a big undertaking, and the success that the corn growers were going to have with this was when we started Dakota Ethanol, the basis at Dakota Ethanol was 50 under. Today, 25 years later, it's 25 under. Now, it isn't because Dakota Ethanol is there. It's because the ethanol industry is in South Dakota. And since we were probably that first one going, they were all in. And they were supportive of us. And several of the people that were on our board were part of that organization. So there was some connections going on. I didn't realize it at the time, but it really propelled us to get us over the edge there. And so, again, I'm going to go back to a lot of the people in South Dakota are the success story of the ethanol industry.
Rod Gangwish, board member of KAAPA Ethanol in Nebraska, which was founded in 2001, served as president of the National Corn Growers Association in the mid-90s.
I was involved in the State Corn Growers Association and National Corn Growers and chaired ethanol committees and part of the ethanol effort of lobbying through that period of time. And while I was doing that, KAAPA was being formed, and KAAPA stands for the Kearney Area Agricultural Producers Alliance, and there's about 500 farmers that are in that area. And we were just trying to find a way to bring an investment to the farm that would return to the farm in addition to trying to raise a commodity and sell it. And we had several successes, actually several failures before we had a success. We were going to build a paper plant and make paper out of corn stover, and we raised $10 million, and it went all the way through engineering, and it failed because they couldn't figure out how to get rid of this black liquor at the end that was left after production, and they didn't know what to do with the lignin out of the corn stalk. So today we just burn it and evaporate it off or something. I don't know what we do, but it didn't work then, and it failed, and we were able to return the $10 million back to the farmers with interest because we placed it in an escrow account and nobody could get their hands on it. So we returned the money, and then we had another failure where we were trying to get a Frito-Lay plant, and we lost that to a neighboring town. And so when we decided to build an ethanol plant, we were able to access some of that $10 million that we'd returned because farmers had trust in us, and we were able to raise some more money, and maybe we'll talk more about another failure later. But we've been dead and alive and dead and alive and dead and alive a couple of times. And today we started out with a 40 million gallon plant. It's now an 80. We bought another plant in Ravenna, which is 150, and we're a major owner in the Aurora plant in Aurora, Nebraska, which is now a 150 million gallon plant. And in the meantime, we were part of Guardian Energy, and we've since divested ourselves of that interest. But anyway, so if it hadn't have been part of the Corn Growers Association that I was involved in and some of the effort, lobbying effort, and some practice that I learned along the way, I might not have come home and invested in KAAPA Ethanol. But just like you heard on the video a little bit ago, it's a life-changing event on our farm. And when you dump 20 or 30 or $50 million of distributions to unit holders in a 60-mile radius of a city, it's a major impact to the economics of the country.
While it was the farmers who were the movers and shakers starting the ethanol industry, they needed people to figure out how to design and build the plants to make the ethanol. And from his farming roots, Dave VanderGriend and his brother Dennis started ICM Incorporated in 1995.
Generally speaking, necessity is the mother of invention. We didn't particularly invent anything in the fuel ethanol industry, but we did take a lot of things and put them together to make an industry that was extremely successful. And it all started, I'm CEO of ICM. We're located in Colwich, Kansas. But I was born and raised in northwest Iowa, Sheldon, Iowa, small town, and on the farm. My father was a farmer, and he kind of was one of them hand-to-mouth type guys. In that day, there wasn't a lot of profitability in farming, especially if you were a small farmer on a half section of land. And so my younger brother, was at South Dakota State University. There he built the first fuel ethanol still designed for fuel ethanol in the United States. Serial number 00001 from the BATF. So his mantra or his concept was sustainable agriculture. What do we do to make agriculture sustainable, that we're not forcing farmers to go to the mailbox every month to see if they could survive another month in business? And so that's kind of how we got started. And so I think that what we heard from some of the presenters that were on the video that you just saw, a lot of those guys, they needed to do something different. $2 corn didn't work very well. And so the opportunity to do something different and expand was what really, I believe, helped drive this industry. In 1999, we produced about 9.5 billion bushels of corn in the U.S. Today, we produce about 16 billion bushels of corn, and 6 billion bushels goes to the ethanol industry. So what did not change? We are still exporting similar amounts of corn. We are still using similar amounts of corn in the food industry, in the feed industry, and everything else. The only thing that changed and created that demand for additional corn was the fuel ethanol industry. Yeah. So we are excited about where that's going, and we think it's a huge opportunity for agriculture.
ICM has since designed over 110 ethanol plants that produce about 1/3 of the world's ethanol. And that's the Ethanol Report for this time. Thanks for listening.